let's talk about one that could potentially just take up the rest of the time. I don't know how to say his name, Gyro or Hyro. There's a question about controlling mid-range. And this is very much, and forgive me, Hyro, if I'm describing you incorrectly, but it feels like a very beginner question, which I love, because I love thinking about the things that are simple to those of us that have been doing all these super nuanced things. Somebody talks about controlling mid-range. I had a thought on that, and I realized that because I think I love hip hop so much, and I'm much more of a producer and writer than I'm a mixer, although I mix stuff and mix my own stuff and have sometimes been hired to mix. I think so much about low end, and I think of so much about high end, and those two things define what I like about records, what I like about beats, what I like about the crispiness of hi-hats. I mean, like getting stoned as a teenager and like listening to Dre records and stuff. Like low end and high end, mid range is always the thing that if we can break it down into low end, mid range, high end, just for simplicity's sake, mid range is the thing I consider the least. But of course, in the kind of music we make, it's the most important part, because that's where the vocal is. Both the low end of the vocal is in somewhere in that like 300 to 1,000, depending on how low the voice is or what the range is. That's where all the notes are. And then there's all the presence and clarity that's in the sort of telephone range, that I don't know, 1 to 5-ish. There's some higher end stuff as well. But one of the things about mid-range that I've been doing a lot recently is when I'm working on a production, and you and I have talked about this before, I do mute groups, which I know you do a bit of too, where you're like, I'm listening to the vocals and the 3 other elements of mid-range in there and seeing what's running into each other. I think mid-range, more than anything else, when I hear people not having good mid-range in a mix or a production, is mostly about things being in the way of each other. So I think for most people, when you talk about controlling mid-range, what you're actually talking about is things competing. I don't know if you have a general thought. I just riff on mid-range for a minute, but
yeah, I love
thoughts
mid-range.
I've had recently.
I'm the opposite. At this point, I got low end pretty dialed in for the last bunch of years, and I love mids. I don't want to mix scooped, so I am very surgical in my mids. So we're talking about control. That's a pretty specific question. How does one control mid-range? I don't know how to answer that question. I think how do you shape your mid-range would probably be a better way into the conversation on my end, which is a lot of cuts, a lot of EQing, a lot of shaping, with reductive EQ, and then tone shaping with tubes or saturating plugins to reintegrate that warmth after you've, like you just talked about, things that are sitting on top of each other in the way of each other. You're kind of, I guess I think about it this way. You got to get separation of each instrument and then, put it back together in some way. So I don't like super separated mixes. I don't like when nobody does. They think they do. They're like, oh, I can hear everything. Well, you should obviously hear everything in the mix that's meant to be heard, but there has to be some sort of glue, for lack of better terms.
Just to feel like a piece of music rather than just elements.
So I reach for mid-range treatment first, right? Like the low end is, God, if it's not nailed in the first 5 minutes, then I'm not sure what's going on there.
Yeah.
And how we have things jump out of speakers is relying upon mid-range too. Yeah. How do we have, transients exist in mid-range? There's no real high-end transients, like maybe on a hi-hat or something super percussive up there. But even then, the sounds, the types of hi-hats we like, or that make it on the records that we think we're listening to and enjoying, are lower placed, right? The hi-hats are under the vocal a lot of the time, depending on your monitoring, right? So, when I think about mid-range, I'm thinking about dynamically controlling those transients and those shapes, because I want a piano. Like, for example, on this mix I was doing earlier today, I took out a lot of high mids in the piano because it was really janky sounding, but then I reinstantiated transients with a transient shaper and a tape emulator after that. So cut out that really wide, bold cut, 10 plus dB in this range. It was just so fake sounding. What's the
range in that telephone 2 to 4K range?
Yeah, 2.5, 4.5, 3 to 5. That area was just not it didn't sound like that the properly recorded Elton John piano that has a lot of that element in it.
I find that really hard with a lot of the piano samples, like the Alicia's keys that everybody uses,
yes.
and there's a few others, that there's like a weird mid-range
so
thing
dense up there. And because you're not recording a real piano when it comes to the MIDI, like the sustain doesn't play quite right with like how a harmonic overtone of a properly tuned, like warm piano sound would be. Like a grand piano, the voicing, the person you hire to tune and voice your piano is like having a drummer that knows how to tune their drums. It's more than half the battle, right? Then put up a good set of microphones and your job's done with a good player, right? So what I'm coming in on this is that this is not the ideal version of a piano. How do we make this? And that can be the same with a synthesizer. That can be the same with a badly recorded guitar that just has a bunch of that dense area. Because when we're talking about mid-range, people tend to be talking about high mid-range because that's where our ears jump to with the Fletcher-Munson curve. If we want to talk about low mids or mid-mids, like I think that's not necessarily what people are talking about when they're talking about controlling this area. I think they mean high mids because it's the most offensive, but the most exciting. So there's so much that we have to discuss here to get down to the nitty gritty. But I think dynamically controlling that area is more important than like thinking about it as how am I like you don't want to get rid of it too much and you don't want to have too much. So that's dynamically controlling it.
Yeah. I find that range, that sort of, again, the telephone range, let's call it 1 to 4. I don't know. What do people call it? 1 to 4, 2 to 5?
I don't know. I hear it a little higher, a 2.5 to 5.5 kind of.
Yeah. I've been finding, and it's actually, it stems from.
I like 2K. I'm a 2K fan. And I know people think that's weird. Like a lot of the records that we all like have a fair amount of 2K in it. And I think people get confused. And I hate talking about numbers like this, but I think people think 2K is 3K. 2K is really musical.
It really is. Yeah.
It's harmonically energetic without being hurtful. You can go too far with it, obviously. But
I've been using that Weiss de-esser on 4K on so much stuff. And it's so magical on vocals just to like take the little thing, because I hadn't used it before talking to you and talking to Baines and all that. Like taking out 4K in a vocal allows for that modern, super bright vocal without it sounding annoying and like ear piercing.
Yes.
Thanks for watching. Just a reminder, all of this content is free. There's no secret knowledge here. There's no Patreon. We don't read ads. We don't have sponsors. We're just trying to build a knowledge base. All that we ask in return is that you share it with somebody. Thanks so much.